going to ask one last question of the panel, the men on the panel, before we open it up. I think role models are very, very critical and important for success of women in their careers. I want to ask the men on the panel, who have been your women role models? And what have you learned from them?
There were two. They were in my previous career. I mean, there are certainly role models now at Microsoft, but I've been to Microsoft for 11 years, and so I guess you would say the formative parts of my life were when I was with the government. Very few women, as you said in the preface, at CIA. When I was in there, there are a lot more now. There's one that used to she ran one of our offices in Africa. Very dangerous, kind of operational environment, but in a totally male-dominated place. But it was one of these kind of folks that had developed a legend because they had actually overcome some terrorist incidents. They'd actually led some very good, successful activities. And I learned from her about not worrying about what other people think about you. Because to me it was, she said, I don't care what people think. I just know I can do the job. If I couldn't do the job, I wouldn't be here. And so, she was one. The other one was somebody that, and I think I told this story earlier in another venue, but in my career at one point, I decided to break off from my normal operational mode and go into, I wanted to try something else for a few years. I wanted to try career development and HR and some other issues. Well, I didn't have those core competencies, but this one particular female leader in our organization, I talked to her. She ran that part of the business, and she talked to me, and we got to know each other, and she gave me a shot. And I ended up having a wonderful 2-3 years learning other skills, and helped start the first mentoring program there and some other stuff. And what I cherish about her is the fact that, years later, right here at Microsoft, when I'm doing our thing in corporate security, a lot of those same skills have come back to help me in my current job, right? But, maybe I could have gotten those skills in other place, but the fact that she took the time to take a chance on me meant that I could be more successful 20 years later in a whole nother life. And those are the two that I remember.
That's just wonderful, because so often we as women ask men to take a chance on us, and so that you could appreciate your role model taking a chance on you is very interesting. How about you, Mr. Sai Choi?
Well, I started work in the UK, and this is 30-odd years ago. I was the one foreigner in the office. I mean, every 2 years we were allowed to have one foreigner to get a work permit, which meant and that's absolutely true. Which meant I drew the short straw as the one foreigner office, and I got the lady boss, the one lady boss there was. I mean, it's the way it was at that time. And I came to Singapore, and somehow that repeated itself. And my first boss in Singapore was a lady as well. And when I kind of look back, I find actually now all my bosses are ladies, all my clients. I mean, unfortunately, I'm in an accounting firm. My clients, lots of lady CFOs, and that actually has been very, very important for me. I mean, my biggest client, Temasek, I mean, that's very big. I mean, there's a lady CFO, for example, and the list just goes on and on. And that has been really, really useful. And what I learned, I mean, it's very hard to say what you learn particularly. It's about relating. It's about the ability to kind of understand, and particularly when, if you subscribe to the theory that, maybe men and women talk naturally at quite different wavelengths, the ability to tune in, and the ability to identify the differences that can work for you and tap into them. And somebody else pointed out this to me a long time later when I started up our corporate finance department, M&A, doing M&A work. And I realized that there were some of the most key decisions when I had to decide whether to go, no go, pursue, not pursue on a big M&A deal, that I was kind of instinctively looking for female intuition. I mean, nobody talks about male intuition, it's always female intuition. Somewhere in my team to go, what do you think? And when it was pointed out to me, that was the first time I kind of realized it. And I would actually make really big decisions based on somebody, one female member of the team telling me, I don't trust him. And the thing would be off. And I put it down to the ability to the confidence in being able to tune in to understand what is the strength which you otherwise don't have in yourself, and that has been my experience, and really a great benefit in having, for the first 5 years of my working life, having really just lady bosses and nothing else.
Right. And I think it was the same female intuition that Steve trusted when he let me organize this panel. So clearly, there is something to this. Harry, how about you? Who have been your female role models? What have you learned from them?
So when I started my career, I was working in the Bay Area, and I was working for Cisco at the time. And we had a vice president of our business unit, and she ran a multi-billion-dollar business unit. I had no idea what $1 billion were back then, or how hard it's going to be to get there. But back then you just seemed to be printing that money. So she ran that business unit, and I think a lot of people were intimidated by her. She came across as pretty harsh. You had to present to her once every week or 2 weeks, depending on your seniority, and it was typically a pretty bruising experience. But I don't know why, but one day I happened to be going home, and I noticed her door was open. So I walked in and I introduced myself because I was the newest member of the team. I'd been there about a month or two at that point. And she sort of asked me to sit down, and she, perfectly pleasant, she sort of spoke with me, heard me out. And then we started having these conversations every once in a while, sometimes at the team barbecue or sometimes in the office, didn't really matter. What I learned from her was, it went to that point, and perhaps that's why that point resonated with me, which I started with. She used to listen. She clearly, as far as everyone thought, she had all the answers, because she was running this business very successfully and continued to do so for many years, even after I left. But she spent the time listening to what my aspirations were, where I wanted to go. I must have been a very difficult person to manage back then, because I definitely was charging pretty hard. And yet she knew how to control or channel that in a positive way. Mm-hmm. And I think that helped me develop rather than destroy my career, because that energy can also be destructive. And I think that's something which I have, ever since I became a manager, I have tried to emulate. And I think, just recently someone said that, you always seem to have time to talk to us. Right. And it's funny, because I didn't realize, but I had organized my entire life based on, it takes a lot of time management skill to be able to do that as you climb up. And I think Mike mentioned that earlier. You have so many responsibilities. You got to do so many things. You got to think strategically. But I think time management, something as basic as that, is what it came down to. And then leaving that person with the feeling that they are not rushed. Yes. I never felt like I needed to leave because she's got the next call or next meeting to go to. I'm sure she did. But she was just very good. So I'd say that would be the first person that comes to mind.
Right.
The second person was actually someone who worked for me in India. And she had a remarkable ability to manage both her team as well as manage me, her manager. And what she did was provide complete 100% attention to whatever task she was doing. So if she was in the office, there was no question of taking any personal calls. I'm not suggesting, by the way, this is the best way to do things, but this is how she managed her life. And it was very effective. She would be completely focused on her team or on me or whoever else, making sure that all her professional stakeholders were fine. She reached an understanding with me, which I was fine with, where she'd go home and she'd switch off her mobile phone till 10 p.m. No, first off, maybe she knew me that I would never call anyone after 10, but between, 6:30 and 10, unreachable, just completely unreachable. And the idea was that she wanted to focus on her house. And when she first started working for me, she didn't have kids. She just wanted to focus on, I mean, she was married, but she just wanted to focus on her personal life, whatever
Yes.
she wanted to do.
Yeah.
And she was honest enough to admit at point she just used that time to read a book,
Yeah.
do whatever. I mean, it was her time. And then eventually she did have kids because she worked for me for a while, and she used that time to focus on the kids. At 10 p.m., she would switch back on. Now, if people called her, fine, but I could see, like, you know, unfortunately, I'd say the leash that we call our Blackberries or smartphones, at 10 p.m., there's huge volume of mails
Yes.
coming from this lady who had clearly recharged her batteries. You know, pity the rest of us who were completely done at that point. But I think her ability to provide that focus is something which was quite amazing. And honestly, even till date, I can't do what she did, which is completely switch off.
Right.
There's this funny, I think it's a television ad which is running on YouTube, which I think it's in Indonesia or somewhere, or Thailand, I think actually. And it's for a carrier, and it says disconnect to connect.
Right.
And
Right.
if you haven't seen it, definitely recommend seeing it. It's making the rounds on other social media.
Other social media,
yeah,
yes.
yeah. I try not to use the F word.
Yes.
But that's okay, Roger, right? That's my PR manager. I'm just making sure. So, but it's making the rounds, and I thought it was actually really good because it shows people sort of focused on their smartphones, not focusing on their loved ones. And then at some point, someone realizing, and then as they disconnect, these people materialize in front of them, and you see them with their kids, with their wives, with their whatever, their mothers, and so on. All these people show up,
Right.
and I think that element of focusing on where you're at right now is something which I haven't figured yet, but she was very good at.
Wonderful.